Happy to talk to my next guest on the Sports Card Shop guest line. We have some similar things. He's a dealer like myself, collector, podcaster. So we check all the same boxes there. And we're going to talk about a sport I love, but I don't think we talk enough about on the show. So glad to chop that up with him today. That would be hockey. Mr. Sal Berry of Puck Junk Podcast. That's easier to read than to say.
Hi, glad to be here.
All right, so we kind of start off. You're a podcaster yourself, Sal. So I kind of the first time anyone's on, we kind of it's the kind of the standard icebreaker podcast question, if you will, kind of like how it all started for you in getting into the hobby and all that fun stuff.
Well, I started my podcast in 2015. Prior to that, I used to be a weekly guest on an XM radio program called The War Room, which was a hockey talk show. And I was their hockey collectibles expert. And I would come on once a week, talk hockey cards, hockey collectibles, hockey pop culture stuff like hockey movies, anything hockey related like that. And I was a guest on that show, like a recurring guest for about 5 years. And then it kind of tapered off around 2014. And I said, you know what? I really like talking about cards and collectibles. I like writing about it. That's kind of how I got my start into all of this as a writer. But I also like talking about it. I mean, just a different medium, different way of expressing yourself. So I texted a friend of mine. It was late at night, like midnight or something. A friend that I had always liked meeting up with at card shows, Tim Parrish. And I just randomly texted him like, "Hey, we should do a podcast." And he's like, "Right now?" I'm like, "Are you drinking?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "No, not now. Later, like in the morning or sometimes this week." So we just started the podcast after that, kind of as a byproduct of me being a regular guest on a talk show, and then it just kind of grew from there.
Yeah, and I've said on this show too. That's kind of how this show got started, Sal. I was kind of doing a Friday morning spot on a local broadcast here in the Syracuse area, and then my work schedule changed. I wasn't able to appear on that, and I'll make the story a lot shorter than it is. But doing that segment each Friday kind of was the litmus test. Like, hey, I can do this, and so I missed it when I wasn't on that program anymore, probably like you did. And I said, hey, I can just, I can do it myself with the audio. And that's how Sports Card Nation podcast was born. And here we are. It's crazy to say 6 years later. And, had no idea how long it would be or whether people were going to like it, but thankfully that's the case. I'm a Rangers fan. I'm a New York City kid. I'm in Syracuse now. I love hockey. I as much of a baseball and football fan as I am. If you ever been to a live hockey game, I would say it's probably one of the most exciting sports to watch in person. On TV's fine too, which I do, but there's something about a live hockey game. Where are you located? And I guess why hockey? Not that there's anything wrong with hockey, but it's not. Here in the state wise, anyway, it's not the most popular sport. So that sort of thing. Whereabouts you located, and how did it start with hockey for you?
So I'm in Chicago, home of the Chicago Blackhawks and also the Chicago Wolves of the AHL. I know Syracuse has the Syracuse Crunch of the
Yep.
AHL, so also an AHL city that you're in. I'm lucky to have two hockey teams here. I got into hockey in the most random way. We got cable TV a couple weeks before my 14th birthday, and I was channel surfing, and I stumbled upon a Blackhawks game, like the last 2 minutes of a Blackhawks game. Had really no idea what hockey was because this was in the late 80s. The NHL did not have any national broadcasts on free TV. at that time they were either on ESPN or prior to that, the USA Network. So you had to have cable TV to watch hockey in America in the 80s. Now, if you had a local team, they might broadcast on a local channel. However, the Blackhawks were also on cable and only their road games. So the only way you could have gotten into hockey in the 80s would be to either watch an Olympic hockey game every 4 years or to have cable television. And like I said, it wasn't until we had enough disposable income, my family, for us to afford cable TV. And then I found hockey and I'm like, oh my God, this is such a cool sport. And then it turns out that both my mother and my aunt were big hockey fans in the 70s, up until about the time the Blackhawks stopped televising their games on free TV. And that's kind of why they stopped being hockey fans. So it actually kind of ran in the family, but just wasn't aware of it until I discovered it in the late 80s. And then, my mom and my aunt were like, oh yeah, hockey. We were fans of that. We used to go to the games in the 70s.
And then did you just started buying cards? Is that where like it went from being a fan to a collecting? Like where did that bridge get like kind of crossed?
Well, I had been buying cards for a while, actually. The thing is like,
Yep.
it wasn't necessarily like peer pressure, but it was like, the other boys at your school do something and you kind of want to do that too. Fortunately, it wasn't like drugs or alcohol, it was trading cards. So, I remember when the
Yep.
Chicago Cubs in 84 made it to the playoffs, and that was kind of a big deal. And so then I remember in early 85, the boys in my school were collecting baseball cards. And I said, oh, those are kind of cool. I'd seen Cubs games on TV because they were broadcast on WGN. They only did home games during the day because they didn't have lights until 1988. A lot of times the Cubs would preempt the after school cartoons that I would want to watch. So a lot of times I would just watch the Cubs waiting for Transformers or G.I. Joe to come on. So when
Yeah.
kids were collecting baseball cards, I got into that. And then when they started collecting football cards the next year, because then you had the 85 Bears and they
Yep.
won the
Oh yeah.
Super Bowl, and everybody was buying football cards in 86. So then I kind of jumped into that. Then 87, 88, 89, 87, 88, I was just kind of buying some baseball, some football. And I would buy non-sport cards. And in 89, when I got into hockey in early 89, it was just like, oh, I got to find hockey cards because this is a sport that I like. So I didn't really become a passionate card collector until early 89. And that's when I jumped into hockey collecting with both feet and really got into it and was really passionate about it.
At that point, was it like 100% hockey, or did you still sort like predominantly hockey, but still dabble in some of the other sports, or not necessarily?
Well, the thing was that with like hockey, there weren't a lot of sets. So like
Yeah.
I remember getting an 89 Tops hockey set at a card store. And then I had it. And I didn't really know what O-Pee-Chee was yet. So I didn't know that there was like a Canadian version of the same set with more cards. So I still bought 89 Tops baseball that summer. I bought a lot of 89 Tops baseball. And then I bought like non-sports. Like I remember like the Batman trading cards came out and I was all up in that. And like the Ninja Turtles and Gremlins 2 and Ghostbusters 2. So I was kind of a sucker for non-sport cards because, I liked, I liked going to the movies as a kid. Who didn't, right? And so I would collect those. But yeah, and then I want to say by like 1990, I don't think I bought any baseball cards. I might have bought a pack here or there just cuz, but I didn't really at that point I was really just focused on hockey other than the random like, oh, these action-packed football cards look pretty cool, maybe I'll buy a pack, or oh, these hoops basketball cards look pretty cool, I'll buy a pack. Because again, there were not a lot of hockey sets until 1991. So once you had the top set and the O-Pee-Chee set, you were pretty much done collecting for the year.
Yeah, like me, Sal, you grew up with the era where we had more than one company making different sports. Like you said, around 91, you had the Tops, O-Pee-Chee, then Pro Set got into the game. Obviously, Upper Deck, and other companies. Unlike now, where Upper Deck is the exclusive, licensee for the sport, they do it. I think you'll agree, they do a pretty terrific job with it. But I do kind of, and not just for hockey, but just in general, Sal, I kind of miss multiple companies doing cards. I thought it made it more competitive. Companies were trying to be better than the other company making those cards, and we've sort of, to me, I feel like we sort of lost that. And like I just said, Upper Deck's doing a great job. Do you miss the multiple companies doing hockey cards, or are you more than fine with just Upper Deck? And I almost, now with the way Fanatics is kind of like they're trying to take over literally everything, I almost hope they don't. I don't want them to have the full four major sports, if you know what I mean. So kind of your thoughts on the current landscape of cards in comparison to when there was multiple companies producing hockey cards.
Yeah, and it's interesting because 10 years ago we had two companies making hockey cards. So for those of you who are not all up into hockey so much, the thing was is that there were multiple companies making hockey cards until the 04-05 lockout. Then in 05-06, the NHLPA granted an exclusive license to Upper Deck. That was actually investigated internally by the NHLPA, who said, wait a minute, why are we collecting money from one company when we were collecting money from 5 companies? And it turns out there's a little bit of a shady background dealing with the current head of the NHL Players Association at the time. Turns out he was ousted because of that. And then for 4 years, from like 2011 to 2014, there was a co-license with Upper Deck and Panini making hockey cards. And that lasted 4 years. And then in 2014, the NHL and the NHLPA said, you know what? We're just going with one company, and it's Upper Deck. And so personally, I like competition. I like competition because you get some great new ideas. And there was even some innovation going on around that time when you had the two companies battling it out. Although, honestly, I feel like Panini failed every chance it got. Like, it just didn't, like, Upper Deck had an idea and Panini had an idea, but Panini's idea was like 80% as good as Upper Deck's idea. I'll give you like one, for instance. When they brought out Donruss, they brought back Donruss hockey cards and they had the rated rookies. And I said, okay, this is going to be the set that challenges Upper Deck Series 1, Upper Deck Series 2, and its iconic Young Gun cards, right? Because, you look at like the Young Gun, that's like the iconic Upper Deck rookie card for hockey. And I thought that, okay, Donruss, cool. You know what? And you know what? They made the base set a little bigger. It was 250 cards. So you had a little more incentive to buy more boxes. Whereas with like Upper Deck, you'd buy 2 boxes, you'd have your full base set, and you'd be like, all right, am I going to just buy more boxes and end up with like 5 complete base sets just to get those last 50 Young Guns? So with Donruss, there was a little more reason to buy more boxes. The thing is that they made a Donruss Series 1. They didn't make a Donruss Series 2. And it was just like, okay, great. So you don't have any of the guys who came out later in the season in Series 2. You don't have players in new uniforms. You don't have rookies who made their debut. They did have a couple of rookies from like a rookie photo shoot, but it was just not, like I said, it was poorly executed. Upper Deck had the Cup, which was their premium product. And then Panini responded with Dominion, but I think they only did it for 1 year. And, okay, you need a little more than that just to gain traction. So I felt like they tried, but not as hard. But I feel like at the same time, Upper Deck tried a little harder because they had to. They had to be more competitive. You had things like National Hockey Card Day became a thing in the United States because Upper Deck said, oh, whoa, okay, we got to do something to make us look like the brand of hockey cards and not just a brand of hockey cards. So yeah, obviously competition breeds innovation.
Yeah, no doubt. Going back to the Donruss, and I still, it's funny how you mentioned the Donruss. I still have some unopened packs here of Donruss hockey. I think they're 96, the ones I have. Why, I'll speculate. I'm assuming there wasn't a Series 2 because maybe sales of Series 1 one weren't up to their expectations, or was there other things at play? Do you know the reason that they didn't produce a following series to, like you said, to catch some of those late call ups and signings and things like that? You know,
I don't know. They just didn't for some reason. I mean, I know that like with Score, here's like another example, like 1011 Score. And they kind of revised the design from 9091 Score. And so they're like, "Oh, okay, we're pushing this nostalgia thing. Our cards from 2011 look or 2010 look like the cards from 1990. Okay, that's all great." Um they promised you one rookie redemption per box. And then I bought 5 boxes. And then I didn't get any rookie redemptions. And then I emailed their customer service and they said, "Oh, no, we're actually just putting the rookies that were going to be redemption rookies actually just went into the boxes." So then I double checked and I saw that one card out of the 5 boxes was one of those so-called rookie redemptions that I just didn't notice at the time because it looked like the other rookie cards. And I said, "Okay, when were you going to tell us this? Like, I bought 5 boxes. Like, I'm all in on
that
this." Like,
that, and where's my other four?
right. It just felt very bait and switch, right? Because I mean, if you think about it, there were supposed to be 10 update rookies. It ended up being 9, but there were supposed to be 10. So I thought, all right, I'll buy 5 boxes because it's a massive set, like 500 base cards, maybe 100 short prints, if I remember correctly. I'm thinking back now 15 years, right? And I was disappointed. I just felt it was very bait and switch, right? Like they kept changing their ideas. And then like another thing that they did that was cool was they did an update set for 1011 Score box set. All right, rookie and traded. All right, cool. 1 in every 20 sets had an exclusive card of a fictional hockey player named Taro Sugimoto. You've heard of this card, or you've heard of the legend? Okay, yeah. So those who don't know, the Sabres in like the 1974 draft, I believe, they got so bored they trolled the NHL and they said, "You know what? We're drafting Taro Sugimoto from the Tokyo Katanas." And the NHL actually like put that down as like, okay, that's their pick that appeared in like the guide and record book that they drafted this Taro Sugimoto. And then later on, like that fall, they're just like, "Oh yeah, no, we just made that guy up. We didn't have anybody to draft and we were just trolling you," right? Because this is back when NHL teams would actually phone in their draft picks, right? They
Yeah.
would call up and say. So Score made a Taro Sugimoto card, which was awesome. And you're like, "Yes, okay." Like, you really have to be a hockey fan to get this or to want this. But then what they did was they put it one in every 20 boxed sets of Score rookie and traded, which I thought was just kind of like a big middle finger. Like, yeah, well, maybe the set will have this card and maybe it won't, right? And then of course that drove up the demand for a card that totally shouldn't have had any sort of demand.
Yeah, it did. So they had the right idea, and then they took the wrong approach. And it's much like a baseball story with the Mets fictional player of Sid Finch back in the day. For those that remember that kind of planted story, he could throw 104 miles an hour, and just this incredible prodigy. And he obviously was made up and not real, but people believed it and ran with it, and it's a legend to this day. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. That one's from the baseball side. But he didn't get drafted. They made a press release as if they signed him, like he slipped through the cracks, and we found this guy and we signed him, that sort of thing. And so it's reminiscent of that. Fanatics, like I mentioned, Sal, is really trying to get their hands in every till. I mean, do you like the status quo where we have Upper Deck pretty much exclusively making hockey cards, or would you be open? Well, at this point, if Fanatics got the license, that would mean Upper Deck would probably be out. Do you like where it is now, or is that something you'd like to see at some point, or no?
I have a mixed opinion. if okay, so hockey cards are kind of like the only child for Upper Deck, right? And Fanatics already has 3 kids, 4 if you count soccer, 5 if you count Star Wars, which probably is like probably the biggest kid. I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, baseball is huge, but so is Star Wars, right? And Disney, right? So Fanatics already has a lot of licenses. I mean, what are they going to do for hockey like that Upper Deck wouldn't do better? I don't know, right? Kind of a rhetorical question, but it's like Upper Deck, they lost the Marvel license. They got the DC license. Okay, then they have like I don't know, like women's volleyball or something. I mean, they just have like they're trying to like expand into like a lot of like other sports that Fanatics isn't looking into, but it's like if Upper Deck keeps hockey, they're going to keep doing the job that they're doing. And I think they're doing a pretty good job. On the other hand, if Tops and Fanatics got hockey, then we could start seeing some of these old iconic designs again used on hockey cards. I think it's funny that like they'll use a hockey design on a throwback Thursday baseball card, this being Tops, or like even like they use like the 7980 Tops design on some Star Wars cards for their like throwback Thursday set. And I kind of fell for it. I said, oh, those look like the Gretzky rookie year. Okay, sure. I'll buy a Mandalorian card and a Baby Yoda card and whatever else, Obi-Wan Kenobi, whoever, right? I think there would definitely be a lot of great nostalgia and a lot of just great stuff if Tops got the license, because then we could start seeing some of those old designs again. I mean, imagine if they made a set of retired players using like a classic design, or if they did like an all-time greats, but they used like the 91 Top Stadium Club hockey design, right? I mean, that would be so cool, right? But then at the same time, we would lose a lot of the stuff that Upper Deck's been doing. And Upper Deck's had the hockey license for over 30 years now. So, I mean, there is something cool about that continuity of like, 34 years of Upper Deck hockey cards, right? I don't have all the sets from the past 34 years, most of them, especially anything without short prints. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, mixed emotions, good on both, good on both fronts.
I'll play I'll shoot right in the middle of that. And this is more pipe dream and Sal than reality. I like to see. I don't want to, like you said, I don't want Upper Deck to lose that licensing, because I think they've done overall a pretty decent job and great designs. But I also like to see, for the reasons you just said, right, some of those finest hockey again, and some of those, chrome hockey they could do if it ever went, if they ever got a licensing. So I'd like to see both of those companies produce hockey cards. I don't think, at least right now in the current landscape and terrain, I think those days are probably in the rearview mirror. But I'd love to see both of those companies, do it, rather than Upper Deck lose their license and then it go to Fanatics way. So that's kind of, I know that's sort of the easy cop out answer, probably not realistic, but I'd love to see that if anything changes, that's the way I'd like it to change. But like you said, I think if it's one or the other, I don't think Upper Deck's done a bad enough job, let's say, to lose the licensing in other ways where companies have had problems before, like you mentioned, Panini. So, that's kind of where I fall on that subject. We let's talk a little bit about the players too. You got a superstar in the making right in your backyard in Connor Bedard. You got Connor McDavid, probably one of the best players in the game in Edmonton. Almost won his first cup last year. I don't know what it is with guys named Connor, but two great guys. You got Ovechkin, who I know's hurt right now, approaching a points record. That would probably, I don't know about you, I didn't ever think that would even be approachable, and yet here we are talking about it. I think hockey's in a strong position. I think it's gained some player. I'll let you speak to that as a seller. I think it's gained some popular, card wise too, hobby wise here in the States. Obviously, in Canada and overseas, it's pretty strong to begin with. Kind of your thoughts on where the state of the game on the ice and off the ice.
Well, hockey cards, I mean, it's funny because there's always going to be people who buy them. There's always going to be the fans. Last season, it really got a shot in the arm with Connor Bedard. So, it seems like every time there's a generational talent going from 1990 forward anyway, that really kind of adds some fuel to hockey cards fire, right? Like with 1990 and Eric Lindros, right? And everybody wanted his score rookie card that said future superstar. He hadn't even been drafted yet. He's
Heck,
in.
not to cut you off, so they even put I lived through the Lindros the craze. They put him in a baseball traded set. He was taking, as you probably well know, taking batting practice with the Blue Jays. They made a baseball card out of Eric Lindros and put it into the score traded set of baseball. And I'm not even talking the hockey one. So
Yeah, they hyped
um,
him every way they could. I mean, in baseball, put him in all the traded sets, even if he wasn't like even in the 92 traded, I think he had a card in that set. He had his own box set in 92, 93 called Road to the NHL. So, he was like super hyped. And then you didn't really see this again until Crosby in '05, right? And then you saw it again with McDavid in 2015. But I think the difference with Connor Bedard is that this is, social media is a lot stronger now than it was 10 years ago. It always gets stronger in good ways and bad ways, but it's more prevalent. And then the other thing is that it's post pandemic, right? And so that's when a lot of other people really started seeing cards as investments. I mean, I think all card collectors did. Oh, we bought this card for $1, we sold it for 10, yay. Or, oh, I bought this card for $50 and now it's $500, yay. You know what I mean? Like, and that's fine. But this is where it really kind of exploded, where you had people coming in from the outside. And then you talk about like those sneakerheads, right? Like the people who buy the Air Jordan shoes on day of release, wait a week, and then sell them for 5 times what they paid for them, right? That kind of short term flipper culture, right? And
yeah,
so, I mean, you saw it you were at the 2021 National, right? Were you set up there or
yep,
okay. So you
yeah,
saw,
yep,
okay.
yeah. Go
So
ahead.
you saw what it was like. I mean, that was the first National that I sold at. People were buying Connor McDavid cards from me and they didn't even know hockey. They just wanted Connor McDavid. That they just knew that he was a great player. So they're just like, "Oh my god, this guy's a great player. I need his cards." And everything that I had of his pretty much sold that over the course of 5 days. With Connor Bedard going to a major team like the Blackhawks, major meaning like an original six, third largest city in the United States, therefore third largest city in North America, right? So major market, original six team that's about 10 years removed from its last championship. But there was a lot of hype for him last summer, even though there weren't really many cards out there. So anything with him in Team Canada was selling, right? And then in the fall, even though there was no young gun, his Tops Now stickers were selling and his Team Canada stuff last fall, I mean. This year it's definitely cooled off. But yeah, last year was such a huge year for hockey. And now it's kind of like a little bit of a down year, right? Where it's just like, the people who collect still collect, but now I'm not really competing with the people who are trying to get his cards. Like, I don't think Macklin Celebrini being on the Sharks and then also getting injured after like his first game um, is going to really drive that demand for Upper Deck Series 1 or Series 2, I should say, because he's going to be in Series 2, the same way it drove the demand for Upper Deck Series 2 last year.
Yeah, and so now the sort of paraphrase where you get more of the purists, right? The true collectors who are going to just be hockey collectors, regardless of how strong the rookie class is or isn't. But it's also nice. I mean, as a dealer and as a seller, I mean, I'm sure it's nice too when you have that kind of transcendent, at least predicted transcendent player like a Bedard or McDavid. Speaking of my team, Lafreniere was playing a little bit better, but he hasn't lived up to the number one pick billing yet, but I think he's moving in the right direction. But it's always nice when there's a rookie class or rookie, even one person in the case of like Bedard and McDavid that can sort of bring attention to the sport. And, some of those people, like you mentioned, Sal, who came in, maybe, hey, I want a McDavid card, I want a Bedard card. Maybe not all of them, but hopefully some of them stuck around too for the long haul. Like, hey, I like collecting hockey cards. So hopefully that's, sort of a benefit of sort of that buzz and craze and hype, and that they stick around and not get out, when the getting out is good. So, and I know that happens, and that happens in other sports as well. So, you mentioned the national and setting up there. I've been to, I think, 5 or 6 now. I'm starting to lose count. I've never set up. I'll do a couple stage, shows, and then I'll walk around and obviously buy some cards, talk to folks, and it's a great week, as you well know. It's under new leadership, starting with last year's, in Cleveland. Are you someone who sets up there and obviously attends the national? Are you, do you like where the direction the new leadership is going? I know it's early yet, and it may, it might be too early to fully judge, but do you like what you saw starting with last year in Cleveland?
Honestly, I didn't really see much of a difference. I mean, I think that the differences that I saw were the differences in the venues between Donald E. Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont, which is a suburb of Chicago, versus where it was at in Cleveland last year, or even the Convention Center in Atlantic City 2 years back. So I didn't really see much of a difference. But then again, maybe the difference was more intended for the customers, the people who are there to shop and buy cards and get autographs. And so I wasn't really doing that. So I didn't really get a chance to experience those differences. I think just from a dealer standpoint, it seemed more or less the same, just in a smaller venue. It was funny, getting off topic here, but it was funny just how hard it was to get to and from the convention center. I had friends drive in, and they talked about how it took them what should have been a 15-minute drive took them an hour. Like, Clemente Lisi, of course.
Yeah.
And Clemente was talking about how he was trying to get the shuttle back to his hotel, and it was like he waited for like over an hour, and then finally he took the first shuttle. They're like, "Are you at this hotel?" He's like, "Yes, I am," and he just got on that shuttle just to get the heck out of the.
Take me anywhere, but I got to get out of here.
Away from the Expo Center, right? And then it was funny because then he's like, and then after that, he's like, I was just able to walk over to my hotel or get like a $5 Uber ride from one hotel to another versus coming into the convention center, which was just a mess. So yeah, as far as like the changes, I haven't really seen it yet. I know next year they're expanding it. They're going to add another room of dealers upstairs at the Donald E. Stevens Convention Center. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, it's good to let in more people. I think it's a bad thing to say like, oh, and there's more dealers upstairs, because I feel like at any show, whenever you put more dealers in another room, those dealers are always overlooked. You know what I mean? Oh, be sure to also, everyone's in the gymnasium, but then we've also set up some tables in the bathroom. Please be sure to visit the bathroom. The dealer's in there too, on your way, out of your stall, and, wash your hands first. And then, be sure to check out what they have for sale. And it's just, I always kind of found it to be nonsense.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think it's just that insatiable demand. There's people want to set up, and they're trying to not turn. I mean, people are going to get turned away and not get a table, and they're trying to like make that number as small as they can. But I also, like you said, I think you've got to be respectful to the existing dealers who supported the show from in recent years or even longer. And you got to, like you said, you got to keep the new dealers in mind. Like, is this going to be a positive situation for them too, or are they going to be, like you kind of mentioned, maybe an afterthought? So hopefully that doesn't muddy up the waters and ruin what a show I love and try to attend, every year. I know you attend the Expo in Canada. I've been to the one in Toronto, and kind of when it was a few years back. It wasn't a recent one, probably 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Kind of went in open minded, and it was a great 3 or 4 days that I was there. I kind of roomed with Eric Norton, who was at Beckett at that time, and he invited me, like, hey, because Syracuse is really not that far from Toronto. He kind of called me and said, hey, man, I got 2 beds in my room if you want to make this trip. And I did. So thanks to Eric. And it was a great time. I bought some cards, saw some people that maybe you don't always see, being that's in, north of the border. And obviously, it was heavy hockey, as you well know, but there were other sports there too. Primarily hockey, and they do a great job with, like, interview guests and signers. And I kind of coined it. I don't even think I was the first. It was kind of like the Canadian National, and I don't mean that in a derogatory, but it's a huge event. It's a huge show, and there's probably people who maybe can't get to the States, so that's their Super Bowl show. I got to get back. I almost went this year, to just schedule wise wouldn't cooperate. So I plan on going again. Just kind of speak to that show. It's not fair to compare it to the National, but it's a great show in its own right. And as someone who's obviously done both, kind of your take on the Expo.
Well, it is a smaller show than the National. I'll say that first, but um, it's more concentrated with hockey. So, if you like hockey, you're going to find a lot of hockey at the National. It's just going to be like 10%, if that, right? You go to the Expo, it's going to be 80 to 90%. You'll find a dealer at non-sports. You'll find dealers from the States who bring their non-hockey cards. They'll bring their baseball and their basketball and their football, because people in Canada want to collect those also, right? So it's more concentrated. If you're a hockey fan, it's definitely worth the trip, because every table, or almost every table, is going to have something that's going to want to make you stop and look. Like when I would buy at the National, there'd be just so much stuff that I'd skip. Okay, here's a guy with 4 tables of autographed baseballs. Guess what? I could just fast track right past those tables, because I don't buy baseball. I don't buy autographed baseballs. But at this show, it's like, oh, that guy has hockey. Oh, that guy has hockey. Oh, that guy has hockey. Oh, that guy has team issued sets. Oh, that guy has dollar boxes. Oh, that guy has cards from this year, so I can finish my sets. That guy has vintage, right? So it's definitely a show that you're going to want to try to spend 3 or 4 days at. It's a 4-day show. If you like getting autographs from hockey players, the most recent expo that I went to, I want to say there were 35 hockey people signing autographs, which a good National might have 5 or 6. Last year's National had exactly 1 hockey signer, which was Dominic Hasek. A couple of years before that, when I was in Chicago, there were like maybe 4 or 5 hockey guys. So here, this was like 35 hockey guys, and then, some actors, some baseball players, I think 1 or 2 football players. So it's a mix, but it definitely skews heavy in hockey. So I would say, if that's what you collect, make the trip, because you will find a lot of stuff that you like. And also, with the exchange rate, it definitely helps being an American and changing your American money to Canadian money, and it just gives you get more bang for your buck, so to speak.
All right, a little bit of a hot seat question, not too bad. Obviously, both shows are great. Like you said, the National is obviously bigger. As a hockey dealer, and strictly from the business side of it, if you will, I'm not comparing the shows to like as many people as you meet or events after the show, but strictly as a dealer, do you look forward to the Expo more because for what your inventory is, you're going to have more percentage wise, a better chance, you have a bigger audience on percentage wise, or not necessarily?
You mean selling at the Expo?
Yeah, comparative to the national.
Well, I would not sell at the Expo, and I haven't, and I have no plans of
Okay, all right.
doing so because being in the United States, you got to bring your stuff over the border.
No,
You got to,
yeah,
and then there's taxes and stuff like that. As far as like when you bring merchandise in, if I understand this correctly, when you bring merchandise in, you have to kind of prepay what they would tax you on your sales. And then when you come back with the merchandise, then you say, I sold this and I didn't sell this, and then they refund you the difference. So there's just a lot of like just from like upfront
logistics.
logistics and upfront costs and stuff like that, right? So I wouldn't really do that to sell. Also, I kind of like being a big fish in a small pond, right? Like if I go and I sell hockey cards, guess what? Everybody has hockey cards in Canada, and they have an
Yep,
advantage because they drove there, so they're not spending a lot of money on airfare and stuff like that.
yep,
Or if I drove there, it would just be like forever, right? I mean, and expensive
yep.
with gas and everything. Um, I like being a hockey dealer at the National, and I'm okay with not being for everybody because you know what? The 10% of people who like hockey, or maybe 20% if you count casual buyers, that's okay. You know what? Like I'm not for everybody. Just like the people with high end graded cards, guess what? They make a lot of money, but they're also not for everybody. So it's like that's the great thing about this hobby is that there's enough different ways to sell and there's enough different ways to collect. Like I know one guy, I would never want to do this, but he must make bank at it because I see him at every Chicago show. He has like maybe 4 or 6 booths. All he sells are quarter cards. Tons and tons, and he has them under his table, and he has boxes stacked on top of each other. And there's always just people around his table. It's like a feeding frenzy, and they're going through, and they'll be like, "Oh, you like football? I got some football," and they'll just hand you a box. And I've gone to his table and spent like $80 or $100 on just quarter cards. So obviously he's doing something right. But if you look at it, some people be like, "I'm not going to mess around with quarter cards," So yeah, I mean, so that's kind of my perspective. I'd rather be a hockey seller in the U.S. than a hockey seller in Canada, where it'd be a little more crowded.
Yeah, great point. I didn't even think of that, and I apologize. I didn't realize you went but didn't set up. So I was going to ask you from a dealer
Nope, just went to
perspective.
buy for my own
Yeah,
collection, and to buy for my own collection mainly. If I find something that I think I could sell in Chicago, yeah, of course I'm open to that. I mean, we're all open to that. We all do that sort of thing. But yeah, definitely went there to buy some things for me.
yeah. You mentioned like buying, like, what do you PC, Sal? Like what doesn't make your showcases at a show? Like for me, I'll answer kind of like my own question. Like for me, as a fellow dealer, I collect graded Hall of Fame rookies of all sports: baseball, football, hockey, and basketball. Basketball probably being number fourth on that list, but I still have that. And will you see that in my showcases? If you see a rookie card in those sports of a Hall of Famer, it's one I have duplicates of. Like the first one stays home. So for you, what won't someone who's looking at your setup, what won't they see, or what do you keep and not for sale, so to speak?
Well, I like complete sets, especially vintage sets. So, like, I'll give you like a for instance. I bought at the most recent Toronto Expo a complete 1970-71 O-Pee-Chee hockey set. That I'm hanging on to that. That's not going to be for sale. Now, if I end up with another set, and then I have two, then yeah, I'll sell one and keep one. But like, so to me, complete sets. Like, I have pretty much every OPG set from 72, 73. I got that 70, 71. I don't have 71, 72. I have 72, 73, all the way up to 93, 94. Tops, I have every top set from 1968, 69 to 94, 95. Then after that, it's like, well, there's so many other companies that it doesn't matter as much, right? So like I like vintage hockey sets. And I also have a complete 59-60 Parkhurst hockey set, which that took me a little while to piece together. Um, So that's the thing, like that, those are my keepers, right? Same with like rookie cards. Like, I mean, I got a Gretzky rookie, I got a couple of Gretzky rookies, and yeah, if I upgrade, then yeah, I would sell one. Um, like I most recently, I'll just show you since you mentioned Hall of
Yep.
Famers, I picked up a Stan Mikita graded rookie card.
Yep.
I don't have this card, right? And he's like the all-time leading scorer for the Blackhawks. And
Yep.
I'm like, I should really have one of those cards. Now, I was looking for this card because I was trying to piece together the complete, what is this, 61, 62, no, 60, 61 Topps hockey set, right? So I was looking for this card anyway. And then just the fact that it was graded, okay, that's fine. It was affordable to me. So I bought it. But yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that, I'm going to hang on to that for a while. Unless I get one in nicer shape, then that one might end up in the case. And I think that's how it is with most dealers who are also collectors. It's just like when you say, do I need to have 3 of this card or 2 of this card or 15 of this card?
Yeah, and not so much now, but I did my first show, Sal, at 15 years old in 1987.
Wow.
And then I had my first store at age 20, 5 years later. And one of the, I get asked even when I'm like on another podcast, if the host knows kind of my background, I get asked, do you have trouble like I want to keep this or I want to sell it, like that tug of war that you sometimes play. It was bad for me in my younger version. Now I'm better at like, no, that's going into show inventory or that's not going into show inventory. But in my earlier days, show days, store days, I had more of that tug of war. Like, oh, I kind of like this card. I'm just gonna kind of hold on to it, not put it in the showcase. And a lot of those times, looking back, hindsight being, like, man, I should have sold that when I had the chance. So that's a thing that used to be an issue for me, not as much now. So that's nice that it's not. But it I had a partner in my store, and he'd be like, "What's that stack of cards in the back?" And I'm like, "Those are like PC." He goes, "Well, bring them home. Like, why you even have them here?" And like it was just, I was like, I'm tempting myself, put it out, or leave it back there, and so he's like, well, just if you're not going to sell them, take them home, and that way nothing can happen to them or whatever. And I've gotten better at that through the years. You mentioned vintage. I love vintage, really all sports, but really especially baseball. As a dealer, and I'll ask you this on the hockey side, it's getting harder to kind of restock and buy it. It's easy to sell. I don't want to say easy to sell, but it's easier to sell than to necessarily buy. And there's more, on baseball and football, and there's a lot of people starting to get into the vintage. I do carry hockey, not a ton. I'm sure you have way more than I do. Do you find it harder to kind of restock vintage hockey or not necessarily?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because everybody who is buying hockey, not everybody, but a lot of people who are buying hockey, they're buying the new stuff. I mean, look at like what's getting, what are the breakers breaking, right? They're breaking, excuse me, I'm gonna take a sip of coffee here.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it sound like I swallowed a frog, but yeah, so the breakers are breaking new stuff. So there is just a deluge of new stuff out there, right? There's no shortage of Connor Bedard cards. When I was at the Expo, it was easy to find Connor Bedard. It was harder to find Stan Mikita or Bobby Hull, right? Just to stick with Blackhawks as my example, right? So anything that's new, there's tons of it out there. So that's easy, right? With the older stuff, it's either got to be somebody decides, you know what, I'm going to part with these older cards, or somebody died and then their widow says, you know what, I'm going to take all these cards and just sell them to this card store. And then now they're going to, put them out on the market, right? So yeah, it's tougher, I'd say. I think with like the newer cards, a lot of people see them as something to buy and sell and make money off of. And with the older cards, it's like stuff that people want, stuff that people like. So they kind of hang on to them a bit longer.
Yeah, that's a great point you made there. The last line, right? I think more you're seeing less vintage gets flipped, where, like you said, the modern, the ultra modern, is more like, hey, I'll buy it on Monday and sell it on Friday and buy some new stuff, and then the process kind of gets repeated. As a dealer, what percentage of your inventory is vintage to modern? Again, it's hard to like. It's not an exact science, but if you had to guess, what would you say percentage vintage to modern?
So if we're talking like pre 1990, I'd say like
Yeah,
maybe 20%. And it might be less than that because I sold a lot of it at the last national. Again, because it doesn't restock as easy. And then
yeah,
also because I'm buying new cards, right? So like I'm always going to buy new cards, right? Because I'm a collector, right? So I like buying the cards. I like opening the packs, even if I don't build the set. I'll try a box. If I like it, I'll get more. If I don't, that's okay. If it's in my budget, I'll buy it. So then I end up with cards that I don't necessarily want, right? So it's easier to buy, 23, 24 product than 86, 87 product. I mean, it's ridiculous that like unopened boxes, like I saw like an unopened box of 88, 89 Tops Hockey. And I was just like, oh, that would be so much fun to open because that was the first year I collected hockey cards. And I'm just fond of everything from the wrapper to the Wayne Gretzky card where he's holding up the Kings jersey. And so I'm like, okay, 800 bucks. 800 bucks for a box of 88, 89 Tops hockey cards. Now, if you complete the set, maybe $100 set, maybe an $80 set, right? So you got to really, I mean, there's no point in buying and opening old stuff. And there's enough of it out there, right? But I mean, at 800 bucks, you're not going to if you bought a box of that and you opened it just to have fun, right? Cuz money is nothing to you, right? So 800 bucks, whatever. Yeah. Like people who buy a bottle of wine for $800 at a restaurant, right? It's nothing for them, right? So I guess if you bought a box of hockey cards for $800, knowing full well that if you open up all the packs, you're not going to make back $800 and you're okay with that, have at it, right? But that's not what I can do, right? So it's easier just to buy $800 worth of new stuff, get lots of new stuff, and potentially something that people would want a little bit more. Because I hate to say it, but if I get a young gun of Macklin Celebrini, or even if I buy last year's Series 2 and I get a Connor Bedard young gun, I'm probably going to have an easier time selling that than a complete 88, 89 Tops hockey set, which is unfortunate, but that's just how it is.
yeah. It's the what have you done for me lately type of mantra that many people in the hobby go to, and I agree. And listen, I used to open a lot more wax out than I do now, as like you said, and I don't mean this as, I'm just being real, like you were, like, right. Generally, it's a losing proposition. Sure, there's exceptions to that rule, but like you said, you got to kind of go in there expecting that, and if you're comfortable, with that expectation, you'll be all right. But it's that's the gambling aspect of the hobby is buying a box and opening it, because there's no guarantee you're going to get what you paid for it out. What's in the box is going to match what it costs, and that's the risk you take. And then sometimes it does happen. You hit something huge, and it you get that adrenaline rush. But like you said, to me, I agree with you. You're better off buying the cards you want to kind of, whether it be for PC or for show inventory. But like you said, I was curious to see how it was on the hockey side, but vintage is getting a little trickier to kind of the restock, at least for me too. And I'm always asking, like, people I know that are at my table, hey, I'm at the point where I'm like, listen, I don't need it in grade worthy condition. I just need inventory. So if you got a bunch of duplicates, or you were starting a set and you decide I'm not going to do it, and you got some stars and semi-stars, and I've gotten some deals like that, but it's getting harder and harder to do those deals. And then, like you said, a lot of people, that competition pool, there's a lot of people in there swimming where you're trying to buy that stuff too, and it's not recirculating like you brought out. It's people are buying that and then keeping it, and so it's getting trickier. But but that's why it's fun, and that's why it's in demand. And when you do buy a nice lot, it's usually productive. I got to ask you a couple dealer questions. I'm a pricer. Like all my stuff is priced. I've kind of been like that for day one. When I'm a consumer at a show and I'm just walking around, believe it or not, I'm a fairly shy guy. I don't like to ask, like, hey, how much is this? I'm not saying I don't. I have. It's not uncharted territory, but I'm more apt to not, and maybe just go to a table and try to find one with a price on it. What's your philosophy as a dealer? Are you a pricer or no?
I price almost everything. There might be a few things I don't price for whatever reason, not
Yeah,
to keep people guessing, although sometimes to keep people guessing. But no, like I absolutely do price my cards. I find it annoying when people don't price their cards because then a lot of times I find it like when people don't price their cards, like sometimes they just want too much for them anyway, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but then it's like I have to play like a game. Like remember memory when
yeah,
you flip over a card, you flip over another card, you go, oh, those don't match, and then you put it right. So then you go, how much is that card? And they go $20, and you go, oh, okay. How much is that card? And they go $25. You go, oh, okay, right. And then like, how much is that card? And they're like $40. You're like, oh, and it's just like you get tired of asking these questions, right? Like, because look, everybody has a threshold, like what they think it's what they would like to spend on it, basically, like what they think it's worth or what they'd like to spend on it, right? So I'm just not interested in playing guessing games at other people's tables. And at the same time, I don't want people to have to feel like they have to do that at my table. Like people have come up to me, they haven't bought it, they might not buy anything, but they'd say, "I appreciate that you price your stuff." Or they'd say, your tables are so nice to look at. I do card shows and I do toy shows. I used to be a big toy collector. Now I'm parting out my toy collection, right? So people will come and they'll just say, you have a really nice setup. And I'll be like, thanks. I hope it pays off, right? In more ways than one, right? Because it's one thing to say you have a nice table, but if they don't buy anything, so what, right? Like, but yeah, I definitely price my cards because I want people to, look at the stuff and just, kind of know if it's something they want to buy or not. And I feel like you said, some people are kind of shy to ask. Kids are sometimes shy to ask or afraid to ask.
yeah,
And then also it kind of gives a starting point, right? Because like we still got those people with their phones, right? Like I saw this guy, I call it doing long division, right? He was standing at my table, he was doing long division on his phone. I know what he was doing. He was comping a Kirill Kaprizov card that I had. And he's just like, well, it's comping for this. And I go, that's okay. I said very politely, I said, look, it's numbered out of 299. I'll wait. He's having a great season. He's second in scoring in the NHL right now. And also I have money tied. You put some money into buying some of these cards, right? So it was just like I was polite. I just said, "Oh, that's all right. I can't really go that low, right?" But if anything, it gives them a starting point in their head, right? And so I think that's nice. I think that's the thing. Like with any negotiation, it's like somebody's got to throw out a number first. And I think if you're a dealer, you're saying, "I'm willing to sell this product for this much," right? You've made the decision that you're going to sell it. You're not going to keep it in your PC. You're going to sell it, and that you're comfortable asking for this amount, right? And I think that like when you don't, then it just becomes a guessing game, right? Or it just becomes like a blinking contest. And I don't think that's really fair to the consumer either, right? Like if they have to ask what the price is on everything, that kind of wastes their time. And then they also might feel like they're hassling the dealer, which, yeah, well, then the dealer kind of set himself up for that, right? Also, one more other thing, I know I'm getting long-winded here. I'll get off the
no,
soapbox,
you're
but
good. You're good.
I think it's also lazy on the dealer's part. I
Yeah.
mean, how many times have you seen where they have boxes of cards and you go in, you reach in, you grab a card, you start looking, and you go, how much are the cards? And they go, they're all different prices. And you're just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it is. I tell you, you sound like me, almost across the board, Sal. It is sort of lazy. I get comps change. I get how comps are a big thing. But at the end of the day, like you said, with the Kiprasov, example, right? It's your card. You can put whatever you want on it. And you know just as well as I do, right? As a pricer, as a dealer who prices a card, it's a starting point, right? Very few occasions where it happens, where someone will come up and be like, I'm taking that, thank you. Usually it's like, hey, what's the best you can do? You get that line, or can you do it any better on that? And so that price is a starting point anyway. And if I didn't price my stuff right, and you come up to my table and say, hey, how much is that card? And I say $25. Now, to be fair, I need to remember that, because the next guy and let's say you don't buy it, and the next guy comes along and he says, hey, how much is that card? It's the same card. What if I said 20? You know what I mean? I forgot. And what if some of these shows are kind of on the small side, and he's like, hey, I got that for $20. And like, he told me 25. And then you can really rub somebody the wrong way, where if it's priced, it's stickered for everybody to know what it is, and it's whoever wants it bad enough or first. And I think when you don't price your stuff, it just can lead to some issues like that. Hey, he told me that, he told you this. I don't get it. He's inconsistent. And even if you mark them up a little higher, knowing like, hey, someone's going to banter with me or haggle with me on price, which I do the same thing. It's not a bad thing. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but like you said, it's a starting point. So like you, I price. I think it's easier. So like you said, some people aren't going to ask, so it keeps them as potential customers, where if you didn't price and they're not going to ask, you've already eliminated them from a potential sale, because you could have the best price on it. It could be $100 card and you want $30, but you don't price it. That person's not going to ask to ever know that. So where if you price it for $30, someone's just going to come along and say, that one's mine, I'm taking it. So I think by not pricing, you sort of eliminate a percentage of that, of people who are buying that are not just going to ask you. And I don't want to do that. Me personally, I don't want to eliminate someone right off the jump street. So I've always done it. Like you too, there's a couple, maybe a kind of a card that's kind of fluctuating from whether it be every couple of weeks or from 1 month to the next. And I'll leave that unpriced, where someone will say, hey, I know that's a crazy card. What are you looking to get on it? And again, and then you negotiate from there. So, we think along the same lines, which is kind of neat. Let's talk about the podcast. You kind of mentioned, how it kind of all came about. How long have you done it? Kind of what do you interview people? Let people know about your show and what it entails.
All right, so my podcast is called the Puck Junk Hockey Podcast, or the Puck Junk Podcast. I started it in 2015. I started my Puck Junk blog in 2007, and then I added the podcast in 2015, and then I added an online store in 2019 where I sell my original T-shirts, hockey-themed T-shirts. Some are based on they look like old Topps hockey wrappers. They're not. They just look like them, but they're my own designs. I have some other ones that are video game themed, hockey video game themed. So I started my store in 2019, and they started my newsletter, my weekly email newsletter in 2023. So I got all these different facets, but the podcast started that in 2015. Talk to people in the industry who have to do with hockey cards. Sometimes I've been lucky enough to talk to some former NHL players who talked about their career with us. I thought it was funny when we interviewed Craig Patrick, who used to be the general manager of the Pittsburgh Penguins. He was the GM when they drafted Jaromir Jagr 5th overall in 1990. He was also the assistant coach on the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team that won the gold medal. And I thought it was funny when my co-host asked him, he says, how do you feel about being on the Jaromir Jagr upper deck rookie card where he's shaking hands with him after he drafted him? And he said, I'm kind of embarrassed that I take up that much of his rookie card, which I thought was just such a funny answer, right? So, we talk about new sets. We talk about vintage sets. We shy away about talking about prices too much because there's other podcasts that do that sort of thing. And
Yep.
it just gets exhausting to be like, this card sold for $10,000 and it's a PSA 9. And it's just like, okay, great. That's, you know what? That's the bling, right? That's the gold chain, but there's no substance there. We did, though, I will say this. When Upper Deck Series 2 came out and the Connor Bedard Young Gun started hitting eBay like right away, we did a podcast about that card and just how the card, like the first one that sold on eBay was $1,200. Ridiculous, right? And just we talked about just that whole day, like how the card started at 1,200 and then it kind of went down to 700, but then there were the different variations and inserts and stuff. So we do get caught up in that from time to time because it's hard not to.
Yeah, and that's nothing wrong with that. So I'll stick up for you too. And that's important stuff. That's especially in a player who's kind of, at least even before he's done anything yet, sort of changing the landscape of the market. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And like you, we don't, even on this show, I don't talk a lot about pricing, but it'll come up sometimes. But my philosophy is this: that stuff is all out there. People can find out. I'm not breaking any news like, hey, this went for this. It's not like any kind of insider information. That's public domain stuff. So I, like you, I don't delve in that too often. And like you said, there's plenty of other content that's already knocked that out of the park, covered it. And I'm more, personal stories and the people in the hobby and that sort of thing, and what they're doing rather than the up and down, pricing. I mean, it does come up occasionally, but it's just not my focus, much like you mentioned. So, but go ahead. I just kind of wanted to interject there too.
No, it's quite all right. I mean, it's your show. Interject away. But I the thing is that like a card being highly desirable right out of the gate, kind of like Alexei Lafreniere in 2021, right? Like you have to talk about these things. Well, you don't have to, but you should, because they drive the market forward. But you're right. Like sometimes it was interesting to, like, sometimes we would recap, like, here are the 5 biggest eBay sales from the last week. But then it was just kind of like, okay, a Sidney Crosby rookie card with an autograph sold for this much, and a Connor McDavid rookie card with an autograph and a patch sold for this much, right? So it kind of just became more of like a laundry list or a grocery list than like actually talking like about like why that's important. And I think that's the thing. Like when we talked about Bedard and like why that was important. So that's kind of like what we cover though. Like we do interviews with people who work in the industry. We interview hockey players. We, sometimes have other guests on. And we talk about new sets. We talk about old sets, right? Because we're all, myself, Clemente, and Tim, we're all collectors. So, we like to talk about like the stuff that gives us joy in collecting.
Yeah, much like the tagline of the show, right? The hobby's the people. Like I get the cards are the common thread, but right, it's us who make up that hobby. Without us, there is no hobby. So I love those stories and the personal aspects of those. So I like that more. Like we just said, I like that more than even the talking about what a card or set or sealed wax went for. Although we do, like you said, we do have to cover that at certain times because it is important just the same. So I'll one more question and I'll let you kind of give out all your credentials, social, website, where people can grab the shirts, listen to the podcast. I'm a guy that likes to find under the radar players in really any sport. You're the hockey guy, so I'm gonna, an underrated player in the game right now that doesn't get enough hobby love but should.
Ooh, that's a tough question. Because there's a lot of players that should get hobby love that don't, that are underrated. Like, okay, this guy's obviously going to be in the Hall of Fame, so saying that he's under the radar is ridiculous. But like Evgeny Malkin on the Penguins, right?
Yeah.
He's been in the league just 1 year less than Sidney Crosby, Everybody wants Crosby cards. Yeah, people want high-end Malkin cards, but it's just funny how like nobody really he's not like a collected player, like at the same level as Crosby or even Ovechkin, right? So I feel like that's a player who's like severely underrated. And I just thought of this the other day as I was going through cards and like right, these go in my 3 for $1 boxes. Oh, these go in my like star box for like $1, right? Oh, okay. Crosby goes in the dollar box, right? Malkin, 3 for $1. It's just funny how that works out, right? Like, as far as like new rookies, I can't really think of anybody off the top of my head who's like under the radar. I think that like a lot of people were expecting Macklin Celebrini to maybe be the odds-on favorite to win Rookie of the Year. He was the first overall pick with the San Jose Sharks. However, he had an injury, so he's not like at the top in the rookie scoring. The guys, though, that are at the top of rookie scoring aren't really exactly household names. So maybe these would be kind of under the radar, even though they have the stats to back it up. Matvey Michkov of the, Matvey Michkov of the Philadelphia Flyers currently leads rookies in scoring and in goals. And then Logan Stankoven of the Dallas Stars leads rookies in assists, and he's second in points, right? So just off the top of my head, when you said who, when you asked me earlier, like, yeah, think of some players to talk about. I was thinking, yeah, Stankoven seems like he'd be the one to win the Calder Trophy, although Michkov has a few more points right now. And a lot of times with forwards, the league tends to kind of lean towards, okay, which forward rookie had the most points? They're the winner of the Rookie of the Year. With defensemen don't have to lead in points. They just have to make like an impact on their team. And then, of course, with goalies, I think this is so funny, but like if you're a rookie goalie, you have to be like one of the best goalies in the league to be considered as Rookie of the Year. You can't just be a good goalie for a rookie. You have to be like among the best. That would be like saying last year if Connor Bedard had as many points as Sidney Crosby and Connor McDavid. That would be like an unfair criteria. So I feel like goalies are held to a much higher standard. Defensemen, a higher standard. And then forwards, it's like, hey, you showed up and you're 18 and you scored 60 points in 80 games. Good for you. You get Rookie of the right. It's definitely a lower criteria.
It's the old chicks dig the long ball line, right? Or chicks dig hitting the back of the net with the puck as well. So I get it. With defensemen, the one thing I like about hockey too, Sal, is in football, defensive players, they could be like game-changing players and their cards aren't necessarily as desired as a quarterback or even receiver. But in hockey, I think there's more love to the defensive side of the game, with guys who are big time defenders. And I it's nice to see that because you don't see that as much in other sports. I'm sure there's room for improvement even on the hockey side, but I think hockey collectors are more appreciative of defensive players than maybe football collectors are, or at least willing to spend with their wallets and purses to sort of make that known than we see on the football side of things.
Well, it depends again, but it depends on the type of defenseman. So if it's an offensive defenseman like Cale Makar, yeah, absolutely. Or if it's like a big hitter like Jacob Trouba, right, captain of the Rangers, right? Like he's a popular player because he's a physical player, right? So when you have like those physical players, they're popular. Or when you have like guys who help in the offense, like a Cale Makar, then they're more collectible. But then when you have like your stay-at-home defenseman, not as much. Your good defensive defenseman, not super popular, unfortunately. I definitely say it probably goes, your top line centers, like your McDavids, or even like your top line forwards, like your Alex Ovechkin or Kirill Kaprizov, especially if they're playing on a major market team. They're going to be tops in the industry, followed by goaltenders.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, this has been fun for me. I'd love to have you back on, but before we before we say goodbye, give out where people can pick up some of that apparel, your podcast, website, social media. No time limit. Get that information out there, and we can steer people that way to check out what you're doing.
Absolutely. So you can find everything at puckjunk.com. You can find the blog, the podcast, the newsletter, the store. All of those things are there. But separately, you could find the podcast at puckjunk.com/podcast, the shop at puckjunk.com/shop, and the newsletter at puckjunk.com/newsletter. And then likewise, if you want to follow me on social media, I'm on X at puckjunk, Instagram at puckjunk. Got a YouTube channel. Got a Facebook collectors group, fb.com/groups/puckjunk. You can join that as well. Yeah, I'm pretty much out there on all the socials and such. So if you want to follow me there, I'll follow you back. And yeah, hope you check out some of the things that I got, my podcast, my newsletter, and so forth.
Yeah, listen, you're approaching your 10th year of on the podcasting side of things, and as you well know, and I well know, at 6 years, that's a long time in this space. So hats off to you there on approaching your 10-year anniversary.
Thank you.
All right, so I'd love to have you back. Thanks for coming on.
Anytime.